all G7 nations, though its overall economic forecast has been upgraded for this year to a 0.3% contraction. The leader of the SNP has revealed the auditors of the party's accounts resigned around 6 months ago. Humza Yousaf says Johnston Carmichael stopped overseeing their finances around October and still hasn't been replaced. Last week, former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell was questioned by police investigating the whereabouts of £600,000 in donations. And Ukraine is now exporting electricity to European countries again. Engineers have repaired damage to power stations caused by Russia's invasion. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 44 points at 77.85. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.13. LBC weather, rain continuing for Scotland tonight. Showers for much of the country with a low of freezing. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 and welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. On the panel with me, to my left, Kate Andrews, economics editor of The Spectator, columnist for the Daily Telegraph. To her left, Oli Dugmore, head of news and politics at joe.co.uk. To my right, Natalie Bennett, Green Party peer and the party's former leader. And to her right, Phillip Blond, director of the ResPublica think tank. Lots to get our teeth into tonight. We had a very, shall we say, argumentative last hour. I don't know if we're going to calm things down in this hour or not. Judging by our panel, I suspect not, but we will see. If you'd like to ask them a question, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. You can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and you can watch us on Global Player.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Now, I don't want to lead you in your questions, but you might want to ask about the junior doctors beginning a 4-day strike today. Joe Biden due to land in Belfast shortly as the Good Friday Agreement's 25th anniversary is marred by political violence. The IMF predicts the UK will have the worst performing economy in the G7 this year. When haven't they said that? And 1 million smokers will be given free e-cigarettes, can you believe? So much else to talk about as well. But let's go to our first caller. It's Robbie in Chelmsford. Hi, Robbie.
Good evening, all, and sorry if this kindles a fiery debate, Iain, given your previous comments. My question is it right for us to hold the left to a higher standard than the political right?
Oli Dugmore, you said in a tweet earlier you wanted a spicy debate. Kick it off.
I don't think... Well, OK, here we go. In an ideal world, we're all held to the same political standards. I don't think that's the case in modern Britain. I think the media environment particularly holds the Labour Party and the British left to a higher standard than it does the Conservative Party. This is a coded question, right, about the attack ads over the weekend that we've all been talking about. And if the purpose of a political advert is to get everyone talking about politics, well, then I think you'd have to say it was rather successful, wouldn't you?
Well, apparently these ads have had 25 million views. So from an advertising point of view, you would have to say that was a success. But at what price, Kate Andrews?
Well, I think quite a big one. I don't think it's right that we would hold different parties to different moral standards. We should be holding everybody to the same kind of ethical standards. But it's a really good question from Robbie because it gets to the heart of something that I think is often felt within the left and explains this backlash on the left. I think the left often thinks that it is at a higher moral standard. And this attack ad you're seeing from Labour is almost, the kind of level that a lot of people on the left think the right might fall to. But as it happens, it's the Labour Party that's put out this ad, not the Tories. And so much backlash on the left, I think, comes from the fact that they just don't feel comfortable with this kind of attack ad. They don't like the underlying subtext, but they don't like the claim in it, full stop. And I just think from a more practical perspective, it certainly puts Keir Starmer in a slightly difficult position because, my goodness, that CCHQ is going to be coming up with attack ads against him and, his time dealing with the law. Well, I'm sure that's just the beginning. I'm sure that's just the beginning. So I think from a tactical perspective, it might have been a short-term win, but in the medium term, it seems like they've compromised quite a lot.
Phillip Blond, my contention in the last hour was that this will delight Labour Party activists because I say that's great, taking the fight to the Tories. Keir Starmer should have been doing a lot more of that. But I wonder for swing voters whether it's very effective and whether swing voters might actually be put off by it.
I actually think it's an effective campaign. I think that Keir Starmer knows where his demographic is that will win him the next election. And it's the socially conservative, economically marginalised voters who went with Boris Johnson. And that is where his majority lies. And overwhelmingly...
So it's aimed at the Red Wall?
Yeah, it's aimed at the Red Wall, but it's aimed at the constituency that they lost in the 2019 election. And overwhelmingly, they live lives that are more economically and more socially insecure than medium middle-class voters. And they all, to a man and a woman, believe that we're soft on crime and that people get away with crime and that they experience a rise in crime. And there's some justification for that view, even though the highest point in recent times is 1995 and there's been a general decline. In homicides, for instance, up to March 2022, police recorded a 25% rise in homicides. And that's compared with the previous year when there was when 39 refugees died. So there are genuine rises in crime. And I think if I was a Labour strategist, I would be pursuing things like this. Because if you can lay a glove on the Conservative Party about law and order, where there is a pervasive sense that has some basis in reality and has some basis not in reality, but nonetheless, if you can make that claim, you're doing well. I think they've overstepped the mark, though, because it's clearly ridiculous to claim that the Prime Minister is a sympathiser with paedophile type activity. That's clearly nuts. But that might have lost the middle classes. But I think that the demographic they're aiming for is ready and open and ready to believe that the Conservatives have lost their way on crime.
Natalie.
Well, first of all, I can promise you that the Green Party will never run any adverts like this. And I think what Phillip's just set out really explains what's happening here is we're seeing swing voters in swing seats targeted. This is a product of the utter malfunction of our political system, whereby we're seeing the whole lot running for at a small number of voters that's tilting the whole system. But we saw at the weekend a survey from Savanta saying basically people have entirely lost trust in politics. And we all know that these adverts are only going to magnify that. And what we actually need is a party, what I would say the Green Party is doing, offering a positive alternative of policies that can make people's lives better, can make a difference to people's lives. You know, a £1 fare to get you there on the buses, building council homes, getting people the right house in the right place. No, well, I'm going to stop right now. But, you know, that's the kind of politics that we should be debating. How do we offer people a better future?
Going back to Robbie's question, he says, is it right that we hold the left to a higher moral standard than the right? And I suppose the point being that the Tories have indulged in some fairly low ads in the past. And so why should we be clutching out pearls? That's what Jackie Smith accused me of doing at the weekend, clutching my pearls on this, when the Labour Party do it.
I will attack the Conservative Party for doing exactly the same thing. I want to show people that politics can make their lives better, that can actually deliver us an economy that works for people, a society that's fair and just and equitable, and all of this taking pot shots at people. And of course, the other thing is, have
to expose your opponent's weaknesses, don't you? I mean, a certain amount of negative campaigning has to occur. Otherwise, you would just be talking about your own policies and not pointing out the flaws in the other lots.
Well, I say very often we should not rest until the last food bank closes because of lack of demand. That's an attack on policies of the governments over the last 13 years. But I'm not going, right, that individual, that person is entirely at fault here. What I'm saying is this is the wrong direction that party has taken us in. We're heading in a different direction.
Oli, given what you do on your side, which is often quite humorous and brings a sort of humorous side to politics, don't you think that political parties would be better to deploy humour in their political advertising rather... I mean, I remember the Green Party in 1989 doing the... before you two were born, probably. But when they, in the European elections, they had this little child standing in an all-white studio, and it started with the narrator saying something about sort of the environment, and then suddenly this whole lot of sludge was poured over this child's head, And I still think it's the most effective party political ad that there's ever been in this country, and the Greens got 15% of the vote in that, election.
And Ian, backing you up for that, 2016 election, our party political broadcast was the school playground where children playing Boris Johnson and everybody else, and that was humorous and got a huge amount of attention.
Don't remember that one, but...
I do. I remember that one. I was alive for that one. Ian, you're asking quite a tall order because you're asking Keir Starmer to be funny. And I'm not sure he's got that in him. I agree. I think humour is a fantastic message carrier for politics. If you have it in your political repertoire to take the mick, to be satirical, as we often are on Politics Joe, then yeah, 100% you should be. But does Keir Starmer have the charisma to do that? I don't know. Does Rishi Sunak have the charisma to do that? I don't know. I think actually this is almost like a COVID hangover. Both of these political leaders sort of had their political rise in the isolation of their homes and in media environments where they didn't have to come into contact with the regular public. And I'm fascinated by what happens in a general election campaign when Rishi Sunak comes into contact with regular members of the public. The clips we've all seen of Keir Starmer being kicked out of a pub by a landlord, with Keir Starmer being accosted on the streets of Liverpool, and he and he just sort of sits there, sort of smiling and waiting, and is security going to deal with this person? You could try talking to them, Keir. That's an option that's available, but I doubt highly about a lot of our sort of leading figures of our political class whether they could actually prop up a bar in a pub in a market town of this country and actually hold a conversation with someone.
And that is part of. If you're a successful politician, and that's what David Cameron was really good at this when he did his sort of Cameron Direct things. He really connected, I think, with people. Whereas Rishi Sunak stands in front of a crowd of people doing in exactly the same format, and it's as if he's. I better not say it, but it's as if he's sort of somebody's injected him with something before he goes on, and he becomes a hyped up Rishi Sunak, and it's all everything's fantastic, isn't it? And really hyped up, and it's just weird.
Did you hear him sort of doing an Essex accent the other day at the end of we're cracking down on cybercrime and going to have this app as well, you can report crime. Then he went, all right, yeah, good, all right, next one. Where's that come from? It's not you. So yeah, I don't find it convincing when these guys try to engage with regular people.
I mean, after the last hour, I said at the end that I'm really dreading the next 18 months. There's part of me that doesn't even want to cover it because it's just going to be so vile and vicious. And okay, all election campaigns in the run-up to you can say they're all a little bit like that. But I really fear for our democracy if this carries on like this.
There's no great story to tell for either party going into the next election because the era of cheap money is over. You can't just spend your way into the next election. Whoever ends up leading the country, it's really difficult times ahead, and the Tories have a lot to answer for after their, very long time in government. But the Labour Party has not yet produced any serious manifesto that suggests they have the answers either. And I think you're right, Ian. I think it could just get uglier and uglier as people really struggle for the answers. But
if you look across the West, political polarisation is now the norm, and Britain's tracking the US, and France is tracking Britain, is tracking the US. So what we have is the entire Western model of consensus is breaking down, and it's polarising into camps, and it just gets more and more extreme. And we lack any political offer that can remake the consensus. It's not on offer anywhere. And it's breaking down everywhere across the Western world. So we're not unique in that. And we have fairly charisma-free politicians, largely in part because we had such extreme politicians before them in terms of Corbyn and Boris Johnson, who, weren't short on their own brand of charisma. And it's a reaction to that. But what's really going on across kind of the developed kind of Western world is an inability to form consensus. And that is what should make us fear for democratic politics.
Well, Ben says Natalie talks a lot of sense, cuts through to swing voters, ! See, and you didn't offer anything negative there, and you've already cut through to Ben. There's a lesson there.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Right, we'll move on to another subject in a moment. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a call and a question to our panel. You're listening to LBC. It's Cross Question on a Tuesday. It's 8:15.
LBC.
past 8 on LBC. We have Natalie Bennett with us, Green Party peer and the party's former leader, Kate Andrews from The Spectator, Oli Dugmore from joe.co.uk and Phillip Blond from ResPublica. Let's go to our next question. It's a text question from Cara in Lowestoft. Are junior doctors' pay demands fair? Well, they're asking for 35%, which sounds an awful lot, but their justification is that just makes up for what they've lost since 2010. So it's sort of pay restoration, I think, is the phrase. Phillip Blond.
I think, look, the problems in the health service are so widespread, so systemic, that what causes me the greatest pain is we don't have a Conservative Party that has any agenda for public sector reform, that has no plan for how to remodel the state. And in the absence of that reform, one can understand why employees of the NHS who are subject to the consequences of this massive dysfunction are protesting. I'm sure that it's very extreme for them. I mean, I know some of them, and their lives are incredibly extreme, and at a certain point in their career, they are living, in terms of income and standard of living, several orders of magnitude out of kilter with their peer group. And so I do understand it, but I think that what worries me about the government is they have no agenda other than saying no. They have no plan to reform health in this country when we've got life expectancy declining, when we've got health inequalities that are rampant and pernicious. And this is one of the failings of Conservative government, is a complete lack of imagination about how to reform the state and how to treat staff within the state.
But answer the question, are their pay demands fair?
No, I think, but I think there needs to be a much more extensive response, just as there was with the nurses across the whole public sector. There's a medium there which the government isn't reaching.
Natalie.
Well, first of all, I'll very much agree with Phillip that the government just doesn't get it on health and has no plan to tackle what we have is a terrible quality of public health in the UK, and particularly with life expectancy and healthy life expectancy going down in many parts of the country and falling. To directly answer the question from Cara, yes, Carla Denyer, the Green Party co-leader, and Caroline Lucas were both on the picket lines today supporting them. They've already said that, they're prepared to sit down to the government to talk and say that they will accept less than 35%. So that was a starting point based on the fact that their pay in real terms is down 26% over the past decade or so. So, £14 an hour for a starting junior doctor. That's someone who's studied, who's taken on a massive amount of student debt. One of the other backgrounds of this story is student debt that's put people, doctors, nurses and other health professionals in a total mess. But I think, listening to people on the picket line, it's the state of the NHS that there is much concern about. And what Phillip was saying about the government not getting this, I mean, public health, we have a broken food system. The government will not even acknowledge there's such a thing, a category as ultra-processed foods, that it needs to tackle when we get more than 50% of our calories from ultra-processed foods. If we're going to ultimately protect our NHS and get a healthy society and give people a decent quality of life, we've got to tackle things like the domination of multinational food companies in our food system.
I mean, in the last question, you managed to get bus fares in, and now you've managed to get processed foods and a question about doctors' pay. Respect, Natalie. Utter respect. See if anyone can beat that, Kate.
These are not serious pay demands. And I really struggle at this point with the argument that they're out there picketing for better services for their patients in the NHS. Patients' lives are being put at risk by the strike. We know that there's going to be horrible repercussions for those patients. It's an estimated 350,000 appointments and procedures will be cancelled over the next 4 days. Women's planned cesareans are being cancelled. People aren't getting their cancer diagnosis. Let's not pretend that this is for patients. And if you want to talk about pay, look, your average junior doctor is earning, it's quite a wide range, between £25,000 baseline minimum up to almost £70,000 baseline minimum. And that is not before you calculate what they're earning extra for weekend work, night shifts, unsociable hours.
But on Twitter this afternoon, a second-year junior doctor put his payslip on. It's £1,823 here last month. Now, there'll be many people listening to this programme who don't get paid as much as that. But if you, as Natalie said, if you've gone through however many years it is of training, the student debt that you've built up over those years, you might expect to earn a little bit more than that.
Hold on, we can say that about so many professions, and there's so few professions where your lifetime earning is going to come anywhere close to what a doctor can earn. So, and we also need to factor in pensions here too, right? Taxpayers are on the line for paying 20% into doctors and nurses' pensions. So maybe we need to have a conversation and rejig how much money they get up front. Let me finish. Maybe we need to have a conversation to rejig what money they get up front compared to what we're paying into their pensions. But there's a reason that the lifetime allowance was lifted in the last budget to get more doctors back into work. Over the course of your lifetime, this is an extremely well-paid profession. Many people will empathize with not getting inflation-based pay raises because the average pay raise in this country is below the rate of inflation. Doctors are not unique in this. I do think their working conditions must be addressed in the same way patient conditions must be addressed. But the idea that these are, in any real way, low-paid jobs, especially over the course of one's lifetime, it's ridiculous.
But compared to other countries, they are. And that's part of the problem, it's staff retention.
Yes, compared to other countries, and I would love to adopt some of those countries' healthcare systems, right? You want to start talking to me about the German system, the Australian system, the Netherlands, you want to even talk about France? We can talk about why in those systems doctors get paid more money, but you cannot, on one hand, refuse to talk about reform, as Phillip has mentioned, always say that that's a backdoor to privatization, which it is not. You cannot call yourself a public servant and say, I'm working for the state in this monopoly on healthcare that we think is a public good, and then on the other hand, demand the kinds of salaries that you get from more free market healthcare. You can't have both.
Oli Dugmore, are junior doctors' pay demands fair? That's what Cara wants to know.
Yes.
So how would you pay for it?
Is that all you have to say?
Would you like, we can get into it. How would I pay for it?
Yeah, how would you pay for it? Where are you finding that money?
Taxes.
Okay.
Tax the rich, tax them until the pips squeak.
Genuinely, what taxes are you raising?
Hang on,
who am I arguing with?
Sorry, let Oli set out his stall.
There is money in our political system. Where it gets spent is a political choice. Let's talk about the £4 billion in unusable PPE, a lot of which that money went to Conservative Party cronies, peers, donors. It is an ethical choice how we spend money in government. And I would challenge people in this country that if they want to go out and they want to clap for the NHS during a pandemic when we were literally sending them into hospitals to confront a disease that we didn't know anything about, sometimes wearing bin liners, those people deserve fair pay. They're not actually asking for an extraordinary pay rise. They're asking for the restoration of what they were paid in 2008. That's not an unreasonable demand.
So do you think part of the solution might be for the government to come forward and say, OK, we get that you've lost this money since 2010. We accept that. We accept that part of your argument. We can't give you 35% now. You don't expect it. There's no way that we can do that. But over the next 3, 4, 5 years, we will do it. And here's the proposal.
Yeah.
Now that, to me, would be the logical way forward.
It's called negotiation.
No, but Iain, I'm sorry. Everybody has lost out. Everyone. It's not just doctors. It's not just nurses. Everybody has lost out. And you can't point to a one-off COVID spend, as irresponsible as some of that spending was. I agree with you. You can't point to a one-off spend and claim that that's how you would fund a perpetual commitment, which again isn't just salary, but is a massive pension on top of that as well, and say that's how I'd fund it. So seriously, you've both said you would 35% is reasonable. How would you fund it?
You'd fund it through productivity gains. One of
no, I'm sorry. Let's try that. I want to know how you'd fund it.
One of the reasons we have low labour force participation in this country is the rise of endemic health and chronic conditions that remain unaddressed. One of the tragedies of our current situation is our NHS performs very poorly against all sorts of international criteria in terms of health outcomes, from cancer to any number of chronic conditions. We have a very poor health system where nobody is in charge, where nobody wants to reform, and where there is no net gain. We also have an astonishingly cheap health system. If you look at GDP spend, the Americans spend twice our GDP on their healthcare.
Because it's very inefficient.
And It's a private. It's the free market healthcare,
hang on
it
is not free
worse.
market.
£1 in £6 spent by the government is spent on the NHS. How much more would you like it to spend?
The point I'm trying to make is that our health services actually, if you look in terms of GDP spend, is one of the most efficient in terms of spend.
It's not. Those figures are wildly out of date.
In terms of GDP spend.
It's not.
What we have is an unreformed, dysfunctional systemic system, and what the staff need to do is to accept the need for structural reform on a grand scale if we're going to improve health, and that's what absent from any union demand.
Good luck to any political party that goes into the next election saying we want to have structural reform of the NHS. Natalie.
I've just got to take on Philip's point about our health outcomes, which are absolutely dreadful. But the question is whether you blame the NHS. We have some of the worst housing stock in Europe.
Well, it's multifactorial.
We have a terrible diet. We have terrible air pollution. All of those things have impacts on people's health outcomes.
We also have a 7.2 million waiting list on the NHS. I think the NHS probably has
7.5 by the end of this week.
I think we have some responsibility here to put on the NHS.
But we eat as a society twice as many ready meals as the rest of Europe on average. We also have the second longest working hours in Europe, and pre-COVID we had double the average commuting time.
I'm on your side, but
and working hours and terrible housing, everything makes people unhealthy because our society is unhealthy. The NHS can't fix those, just as schools can't fix the impacts of poverty and inequality on health and education outcomes.
I'm going to be very unhealthy myself if I don't bring this to a close, because Corey, my producer, will probably hit me if I go to the news late. It's 8:30. See, I'm under such pressure. It's bullying, basically. 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Charlotte Morgan.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, police have recovered 4 suspected pipe bombs from a cemetery in Londonderry where an Easter Monday Republican commemoration was staged. A statement says they've been made safe and taken away for investigation. Our Belfast correspondent Amanda Ferguson has more.
All the devices were located in that concentrated area where clothes worn by participants in yesterday's unnotified Easter parade were removed.
The International Monetary Fund's warned the world economy is entering a perilous phase. The UK is expected to fare the worst out of all G7 nations, though its overall economic forecast has been upgraded for this year to a 0.3% contraction. The leader of the SNP has revealed the auditors of the party's accounts resigned around 6 months ago. Humza Yousaf says Johnston Carmichael stopped overseeing their finances around October and still hasn't been replaced. Last week, former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell was questioned by police investigating the whereabouts of £600,000 in donations. And Ukraine is now exporting electricity to European countries again. Engineers have repaired damage to power stations caused by Russia's invasion. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 44 points at 77.85. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.13. LBC weather, rain continuing for Scotland tonight. Showers for much of the country with a low of freezing. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
LBC.
In a
such a bully. He's now forcing me to apologise for saying that he's a bully. 8:34 on Cross Question. We have Baroness Natalie Bennett with us, Kate Andrews from The Spectator, Oli Dugmore from joe.co.uk and Phillip Blond from ResPublica. Our next question comes from Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Ian and panel. Yeah, the question is will Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross live to regret tactical voting against the SNP?
I think regret endorsing tactical voting. He hasn't actually said he's doing it himself, which would be quite a news story if he did. This is... Douglas Ross is the Tory leader. In fact, I think he's doing a phone-in with us in a couple of weeks' time on the programme. He said, effectively, that if you live in a seat where Labour can oust the SNP and the Tories don't stand a chance, you should consider voting Labour, which is quite something for a political party leader to say. He was then asked if he'd consulted Rishi Sunak over this, and he said no, he hadn't. And then he kind of half withdrew it, I suspect, after pressure from Downing Street. Anybody have any Scottish roots here? No. Natalie.
Well, I think this is just a demonstration of how broken our political system is, and you were saying how things are breaking down, and it's in the majoritarian first-past-the-post type systems, or indeed AV in Australia, in the US, in the UK, where people are thoroughly disillusioned because they can't vote for what they want and get it.
It's the same whatever system, I'm afraid. It's present.
If you have a proportional system, if 10% of people vote Green, then
minorities control majorities. Unfortunately, it's not the answer. I mean, I now favour it because I think we need.
So it's not the answer, but you favour it.
No, it's not. It's not an answer to political stability. Or problems of unrepresentation, but we have a political class dominated by one view. And until we break that up, they will continue to dominate.
Typically in PR systems, you have a government that represents about 70% of voters have voted for people in that coalition. That's far more representative than what we have now.
Minorities exercise undue influence in PR systems, in my view. But I also see the problem with our system. All I'm saying is neither system addresses and solves polarisation. As to the point that Douglas Ross about Scotland, I think he was right. I think if you care about the union, you want to see nationalism defeated in Scotland, and I do. And I think in that sense he was just being a realist and should be sort of applauded for that. I think that it would be good if somebody other than the SNP ruled Scotland, because the SNP have done such an appalling job.
Did Labour do a better job when they were
I'd rather they had a go. And at least they would be...
The Greens in Scotland, of course, are pro-independence.
Very
but they're separate from the English Green Party, aren't they?
Well, but we entirely support them, and I indeed have been speaking up for many of the things that our Green Scottish ministers have been doing. So you support independence for Scotland, yet you didn't support independence for Britain in the Brexit referendum. How does that work? Well, we believe that decisions should be made locally and only referred upwards when absolutely necessary. What we have in the European system is where you refer decisions up that need to be taken on a continental level. We don't think the EU is perfect, but it's perfectly right that you make decisions at that right level.
Oli?
I'm not buying the argument that minorities wield undue influence in coalition governments. I think proportional representation is something that we should be aiming for in our representative democracy. I mean, Philip, did you think that the Lib Dems wielded undue influence?
Yes.
Really?
Very much so. Yes.
In what sense?
Where's the evidence?
Well, the evidence is that they got 75% of their manifesto promises in 2010 through.
But they didn't get PR.
All that happens is unrepresentative parties dictate the policies of majorities. So all I'm saying is I think it's, from the perspective of consensus and exclusion, it's just as imperfect.
Is there a bit of dissonance here between what you were saying earlier in regards to sort of polarisation and the increasing fragility of our democracy, and then simultaneously the concept of coalition government, consensus politics between different parties is also the enemy? Are those two things not sort of running...
No, because what we have is essentially governance by liberals, whatever party you vote for, and I've long argued that economic and social liberalism are one and the same, and we have a party of the left that argues.
But that's what you consistently argue for.
Yes, yeah. No, I've argued.
So
why
complain about it?
I've argued against it because what I'm saying is that ideology is hegemonic. That is in control, whatever party you have, and you just get soft left social liberalism and economic.
That's your entire political thesis.
is contra that. I'm opposed to that. So what I would like is a genuinely
You describe yourself as a red Tory.
I am a red Tory.
Which means that you are liberal from an economic point of view and a social point of view.
No, it doesn't. No, you need to read the book, Ian. It means
I did a long time ago.
Yeah. No, I'm not trying to be contrary for the sake of contrary. It means I'm for an empowering form of economics that tackles inequality, which liberal economics cannot and has not done. And I'm for a form of cultural conservation that preserves people and recognises their needs and their values. That's my politics, which isn't represented by any of the
Liberal
parties.
economics has pulled more people out of poverty in the third world than any other form of economics has
Liberal
ever done.
economics is also, if you look at the chart by Milan Brankovic, the famous elephant graph, has proletarianised the working class in the West and elevated the poor in Asia. If you look at the gains from globalisation, they haven't flowed to middle class or working class people in the West. They flowed to the working class in Asia. Liberal economics does not answer the distributional question. It creates oligarchy and oligopoly, and it doesn't.
You don't think so? Just to be clear,
I was thinking you were doing so well to have stayed out of this so far, Kate. But go.
I struggle with the assertion that globalization, 90s, 2000s, the rest of it, has not made the working and middle classes in the West vastly wealthier. Access to products
There's clear evidence. If you just type in Google and type in elephant graph, you'll see from the World Bank economist.
That's not an argument.
It is an argument. I'm pointing you to the evidence.
No,
you're pointing to ideology.
No. Type into Google is not an argument. We have become vastly wealthier with far more access to goods and services around the world than we ever had before. And look, you can certainly make the case that the way that immigration impacted the economy, had short-term wage suppression on the working class in the Tony Blair years. But if you look at China coming online, the huge deflation that created, and the huge boost of wealth that it gave, not just to those developing countries, but to the developed ones as well, I think it's indisputable how beneficial it has been overall. To suggest that liberal economics, especially as Anne says, which has just been the best mechanism we've found so far, not only to pull the impoverished out of absolute poverty, but also to enable people to rise up, to gain more wealth from whatever status they started from, is undeniable.
Well, I deny it, and you keep drinking the Kool-Aid because the evidence is clearly to the contrary. What has happened in wage suppression has been going on for the American unskilled workers since the 1970s, with offshoring. Jobs have been pushed out, working class insecurity and debt have all massively increased. And if you look
can I just point out that the question was about Douglas Ross and the SNP? It's appalling chairmanship on my part to have let this get to this stage.
This is why
Natalie,
nationalism has come back. Nationalism had come back because the old offer didn't deal with the needs of ordinary people. That's why you have...
And I'm going to agree with you, Philip, and I'm going to bring this back to people's lived reality. Think of the explosion of desperate people having to use food banks. Think of the way that people are struggling to pay rents.
SNP,
and think of
Douglas Ross.
And think at the fact of the United States. 1 in 25 babies born today is not going to reach their 40th birthday. That is a failed economic model that's not giving people the most basic of all life.
But you're talking about... I mean, I'm happy to go back to Douglas Ross, but just to be very quick on this, I think you are confusing serious domestic problems that still exist in society with pretending that somehow we're poorer or worse off than we were 40 years ago. We are not. And Douglas Ross is going to live to regret this comment because he said the thing out loud that Tories don't want said.
You get extra brownie points for bringing it back to Douglas Ross, but we're going to take a little bit of an early break so we can fit in 2 questions on pregnant women smoking and the Israel-Palestine conflict within the next 10 minutes. See if we can manage that. It's 8:44.
LBC
6 on LBC. Natalie, Bennett, Kate Andrews, Oli Dugmore and Phillip Blond with us. Let's go to our next question. It's a text question from Julie in Shrewsbury. Why should the taxpayer have to pay 400 quid to pregnant women to stop them doing something so selfish and careless as smoking? Now, this is the government announcing today that pregnant women will be offered up to £400 to stop smoking, while up to 1 million tobacco smokers in England will be given free vaping starter kits. Kate?
I'm sympathetic to the point because I worry about cash, and I think generally speaking, cash incentives and cash top-ups are quite good, especially for maximizing freedom. But in this case, it is a worrying incentive, this idea that, you're going to pay somebody to do something that they clearly should not be doing for health purposes. I'm much more sympathetic to the bigger announcement around this question today, which is that smokers are going to be given vapes as a replacement, a much cheaper option, be very specific to the problem that they have, that it's not money to go spend on, potentially more cigarettes. It's a clear alternative. And I'm delighted that the UK is one of the countries to actually embrace the evidence on vaping, to recognize it is so much better to switch to vaping than it is to ban vaping or treat it as the same as cigarettes.
There are quite a lot of people in the medical profession that dispute that.
Yeah, there are some people who dispute it, but I think the evidence, the overwhelming evidence leans in favor that vaping is less bad than smoking. I'm not encouraging people to take up vaping if they don't do it, but if you are smoking tobacco via cigarettes, the evidence is pretty overwhelming that to switch to the vape is safer and healthier. And I'm pleased that the UK is embracing that compared to countries like the US, which have done a full-blown assault on vaping, and I suspect are making people's lives and health worse in that process.
The worrying
hang on, I haven't come to you yet, Philip. I'm going to Oli first.
As a proud vapor, although I don't think there are probably better words for it, but that's unfortunate, isn't it?
No, own it.
Yeah, Vape Nation. I'm going to rip some sweet cotton outside once we finish this panel.
Rip some sweet cotton.
Yeah, it's just copying American frat boys. It's
okay.
I'm trying to be funny, Ian. Sorry.
That's what you get on joe.co.uk, ladies and gentlemen.
It's great insights like that.
It sounded quite dubious to me. Brings to mind all manner of peculiar sexual proclivities.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on. So, taxing people who smoke, good idea. Disincentivise people smoking, pay people to vape or to stop smoking. It's on the same spectrum of ideas. I think one of the greatest public policy successes of recent British governments has been the increase on taxation on tobacco, because it has declined tobacco use. It is a killer. It will kill you. And as Kate was saying, as a proud vapist, I think that...
No, that is wrong.
Yeah, that is wrong. Yeah, that's not great. There needs to be a better word for it. But I think the health benefits of it, whilst it's not, the research into it is early stages and it's not as evident and certain as what we know about smoking, which is that it does cause cancer, the fact that the early evidence suggests that at least vaping doesn't cause the same kind of health issues, it's something that we should be embracing and pushing people to adopt.
Okay, Philip.
I think Kate is quite right, and that if offered the choice between harmful tobacco, the group of kind of immovable smokers, much better for them to be vaping. But there's another side to the vaping debate, which is that it allows vape manufacturers to mass market vapes to people who don't smoke at all. And indeed, that is also happening. And so the permissiveness around moving those from smoking to much less harmful vaping, which I'm in favour of, actually then licenses vaping as a gateway drug in itself to more vaping. It allows market expansion amongst the young. Now, you may well argue, and you would be right in my view, that vaping is less harmful than smoking, but I think you'd be wrong to argue that vaping has no health consequence. So my concern is that actually it licenses the mass marketing of vaping to young people. Indeed, that's what's going on.
Alan in London says, give my wife 1,200 quid retrospectively for not smoking or drinking while she was pregnant with my 3 children, and my mother for doing likewise with my brothers and myself. Natalie.
Well, coming back to Julie's question, why should we pay this £400? Because the baby that's almost certainly going to be born at the end of this will be healthier, has had no choice in this matter.
Do you not think the mother should take responsibility for that?
Well, but we were talking before about the NHS and pressures on the NHS. Do we want a low birth weight baby with health problems to be born in out of society, or do we want a child to be born with the best possible health conditions with the best possible chance in life? I think that's unarguable. And this has not just come out of nowhere. There's actually been a number of trials done with this, and this has been shown it does actually work. It makes a difference. And I also think, we know how much so many people are financially struggling at the moment. When people start to go off on maternity leave, financially they're really struggling. I don't think it's a terrible thing to be putting £400 in at that point. That's going to help all of us.
Right, let's move on to Hassan in Cambridge. Hassan, what's your question, please?
Yeah, hi. So 3 Israeli settlers of English origin were killed this year, and also 80 Palestinians, of which 12 were children, were also killed from the start of the year. What can be done to bring peace to the Holy Land?
And we've got 6 minutes to bring peace to that region. I mean, this is a question which, looking at the interviews with the family members, your heart goes out to them. But this is happening now on a weekly basis, where people on both sides of the conflict are being killed almost indiscriminately, it seems. What can be done about this? Natalie, let's start with you.
Well, again, to share the sorrow, the horror of so many deaths, innocent civilian deaths that are happening. But we've got to be realistic about what the UK can actually achieve, what it can possibly do. And that means supporting peace, promoting talks. And one of the things we can immediately do is stop pumping arms into the conflict. Since 2010, we've licensed £442 million worth of arms being sold to the Israeli government. That's not a positive. That's not a constructive response to the solution. That's a figure from Campaign Against the Arms Trade. And so we have to acknowledge that we can't fix all the problems in the world. We saw how disastrous it was when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan and tried to do that. But we should stop throwing fire on the flames.
Would one solution or partial solution not be to abolish the Israeli voting system, so you don't have these extreme parties, tails wagging the Netanyahu dog?
Well, this is the problem. I think that
you're in favour of PR, though.
I don't think PR is the solution. As I've said throughout, that it won't give you the solution to the problem you state. What we have in the Middle East is essentially terrified populations voting for people who, like Netanyahu, claim to make them safe. And what we don't have is any domestic idealism on either side that can possibly begin to foster a new consensus. I remember having a dinner with the Israeli foreign minister about, must have been 5 years ago, who was quite an extremist. And he's basically said everybody now accepts on all sides the two-state solution. But the trouble is Israel can't be a two-state solution. It's got a growing Arab-Israeli minority that makes it feel unstable. The two-state solution isn't even a stable solution. So we have to, in some sense, get out of this logic of fear. And I think that's a domestic idealism that both sides have to produce, but it's not there.
Oli.
Well, the best and greatest minds in foreign policy have been trying to solve this issue for the last, 50 years or more. I'm not going to be able to solve it in the 4.5 minutes that we have left. I'm going to have a quick word on it. We've talked about both sides in this conflict, and people have died on both sides, but we should recognise that the deaths and the violence that are perpetrated in this conflict, it is asymmetrical. The Israeli state has been called an apartheid state by Amnesty International and B'Tselem, a human rights organisation on the ground in the Middle East. We need to be conscious of the way that Israel is changing. Huge demographic change is happening in Israel. The younger population there, conversely to what you're seeing in much of Western Europe, where the younger population is more socially progressive and more left-wing, the growing, and particularly the growing ultra-Orthodox population in Israel, is incredibly right-wing. And whilst we're talking about Ben Gvir and Smotrich and that sort of the tail wagging the Netanyahu dog, that is not going to be an outlier for the foreseeable future in Israel. The population is moving towards the right, and we can expect politicians of that calibre to keep popping their heads up in the future.
Kate.
Well, I'll echo Oli that this isn't a question I feel I can answer, any of us are going to answer, nor is it a question that I think even countries like the US or the UK can answer until Israel and Palestine find more areas of agreement. And to Natalie's point, I'm sorry, maybe it was Philip's point, facilitating those talks is really one of the best things we can do. The U.S. is not in a position to abandon Israel when it comes to its weapons support. I mean, I really do hear you on that, Natalie, and I'm uncomfortable with many aspects of it. But at the same time, I don't think just turning away from Israel, given its very precarious position on the world stage, is going to be the answer either. But fundamentally, we have to come up with some kind of solution that is going to be palatable for Israel and Palestine, that genuinely recognizes territory for both. And to go back to the two-state solution, I appreciate it's imperfect, but there does seem to be growing consensus there. But until the administrations in both of these countries can find some kind of agreement, there's no way that any of us are going to be able to make a call about how we prevent these deaths. I mean, I'm sorry to Hassan, it feels like near impossible for us to make that call when the parties involved are nowhere near even really. They cannot accept any kind of compromise to take this issue and really address it.
Natalie's really looking forward to this fun question at the end. It's from Molly and crew. Over 1 million smokers are getting free vape kits or vouchers to get. No, we've already done. Haven't we done that one? To give up. What vice would you accept money from the government to give up? Mine would be chocolate fingers. LOL, says Molly. Philip.
Poppadoms.
I wonder what you're going to say then.
I would accept money from the British government when in curry houses not to overindulge in poppadoms.
Can I recommend Marks and Spencer's have these new mango chutney poppadoms crisps, which are unbelievable. Yeah. I should be having a packet on my way home tonight.
It's the greatest culinary.
Natalie.
We were on ultra-processed food here earlier. We seem to have got a bit of fallen off the wagon a bit here. Yeah. I guess I'd have to say...
Ready meals.
Twitter. I spend far too much of my life on Twitter, and it's doing politics and it's work, and I just never stop doing it. And so,
Can I recommend, to make your Twitter experience more enjoyable, only allow people who follow you to reply to your tweets? It's made my Twitter experience much more enjoyable. Kate?
I hate this question, Iain. I take such issue with this question, but you said, it's a fun question. I'm going to say biting my fingernails, and this is a tactical answer because the government can ban chocolate fingers, they can ban pompadons, they can ban processed food, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to. They can't ban fingernails, so I'd take money to stop biting my fingernails.
But do you know where they've been? Well, I suppose you must do, but...
I actually do know where my fingernails have been. I've got a good sense.
We're all gagging to hear what Oli's going to answer.
I think I'd be interested to hear what some of the answers were if we weren't live on the radio right now, Iain,
exactly.
to be honest with you. And so as a result of that, I'm going to also cop out and say that it's vaping in the same way that everyone else.
Don't give them ideas, guys. Don't give them ideas.
You've let yourself down. You've let the programme down. You've let your country
down.
Once
we're off air, I'll tell you.
Okay, excellent. Right, let's get off air. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And a little thank you to Will M on Twitter, who says, in response to a cross-question tweet I did yesterday, such great radio. Never used to be a big radio listener, but Iain Dale's radio show has become a regular weekday listen now. Particularly enjoy the 9 to 10 p.m. topics. I think he means 8 to 9 p.m. Or does he? I don't know. Because our 9 p.m. topic coming up in a moment. We're going to be covering live the landing of Air Force One in Belfast, carrying President Biden, who's going to be on an official, is it 4 or 5 day trip to the island of Ireland, but he's only spending less than a day in Northern Ireland. He's going to be making a big speech tomorrow. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is meeting him off the plane in about 20 minutes' time. So we're going to ask, is the future bright for Northern Ireland? Obviously very keen to hear from you if you live in Northern Ireland or if you have connections to Northern Ireland. But also, I suspect the subject of the reunification of Ireland is going to come up over the next few days. Joe Biden is apparently the most Irish president in decades. So all the researchers say. I wonder what this visit is going to do for the island of Ireland.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Police in Northern Ireland have recovered 4 suspected pipe bombs from inside the city cemetery in Cregan in Derry. They were found in the same place where paramilitary-style clothing was burnt yesterday. US President Joe Biden is arriving in Belfast tonight to commemorate 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement was signed. He'll meet party leaders but can't address the Stormont Assembly because of a post-Brexit trade row, as our Belfast correspondent Amanda Ferguson explains.
We know that most of the parties in Northern Ireland are satisfied with the Windsor Agreement. However, the DUP, the lead party of unionism in Northern Ireland, remains opposed. It has objections to the Windsor framework as it was agreed between the EU and the UK, and that's the reason that we don't have government at the moment.
Some junior doctors have been asked to leave picket lines and return to work. The British Medical Association says the A&E department at Western General Hospital in Somerset has been left exposed because of poor planning by local management. The union wants a 35% pay increase, which the government says is unrealistic. But Green Party peer Baroness Natalie Bennett has told Cross Question there's likely room for negotiation.
They've already said that, they're prepared to sit down to the government to talk and say that they will accept less than 35%. So that was a starting point based on the fact that their pay in real terms is down 26% over the past decade or so.
The boss of business lobby group, the CBI, says he's shocked to have been sacked. Tony Danker has been dismissed with immediate effect following an investigation into complaints about his behaviour. Our business commentator Declan Curry says there may be more to come.
The organisation is also investigating other serious allegations going back several years. The CBI says these allegations do not involve Mr Danker. 3 other CBI employees have been suspended, and the organisation